Do you know that most wealthy families can't hold on to their money for more than 3 generations? In fact, let me just list some of the names of wealthy families from the 1800s: Vanderbilt, Carnegie, DuPont, Getty. Now, with some very rare exceptions, most of these families' wealth, they're not on the Forbes billionaire list. I mean, you don't see a Vanderbilt, a Carnegie, or DuPont. Um, Getty's grandson is still on there, but he hasn't been able to build that wealth. He's just been able to hold on to it. And another name that you'll see is David Rockefeller Sr. Now, Rockefeller, during his time, was the wealthiest man in the world, and his son is barely is not in the top 200 of billionaires. And you would think, well, it would be very easy if your grandfather was the wealthiest man on earth. Why can't you be the wealthiest man on earth, or at least be in the top 100? It's just kind of build on that wealth. So here's an interesting fact: is if you actually look at all these wealthy families and put them on a chart, you'll find that there's the same pattern where after 3 generations the family loses its wealth. And I kind of want to break down to you why wealthy families lose their wealth after 3 generations, and how this can apply to you. Because what happens is it's a loss of core values from the first generation who builds the wealth to the third generation who essentially squanders the wealth. So I'm just going to give an example of a typical family, a dynasty family that becomes rich. And let's start with the first generation. Now, the first generation is usually, and I'm going to use an American example, is usually like an immigrant who comes from the old country, comes to America, and he probably learned to trade. Let's say he's a carpenter. And he probably learned that trade because back in the old country, his family had to build their own house from scratch because they were very, very poor. So he comes to America and maybe takes his carpentry trade and begins working on houses, working as a subcontractor. And this person comes to America, sees all this opportunity, and wants to become rich. So he learns that, oh, the way a lot of people are becoming rich is they're taking houses and buying them and fixing them up and selling them. So he decides, hey, I'm going to save up all my money, buy a really cheap house, fix it up, and resell it. So this first generation man, working very hard with his hands, doing carpentry work, saves up his money, buys a house, fixes up the house himself, and then flips it and makes a profit. And then he realized just flipping that house, he's making more money flipping that house than he did an entire year of, hammering nail to wood. So he realizes, okay, this is what I should do. I should take my carpentry work, start a business of buying houses and flipping them. So that first generation person goes from being an immigrant with no money to now he's building wealth by flipping houses and getting into real estate. And this immigrant becomes essentially rich, not rich in the sense of private jets and Rolls Royces, but rich in the sense that maybe he has $1 million in the bank and his family moves from a little apartment to a nice big house. So now you have this immigrant who has now become rich. He has a son. And now this son learns the family trade, and he learns from his immigrant dad the story of how the immigrant came to America, worked on houses, and started this company. And this young second generation man learns at the age of 13 about the family business. And this is at an age when most kids are more concerned about video games. He's learning about building the family business. And maybe his dad has him working the summers, working as a carpenter, so he learns the value of physical labor. But this second generation person now, unlike his dad built his wealth without going to college. The second generation kid probably goes to a pretty good college. Plus, he has that knowledge of physical labor, and he turns his dad's $1 million business into a $50 million, $100 million business because he's able to scale up using his higher education knowledge. He's now buying, let's say, 10, 12 unit buildings or apartment buildings, and now he has taken his dad's wealth, his family being rich, and made them wealthy. Now, the company, the real estate development company, is now making $10 million a year, $20 million a year, and they go from living in a really nice house to a mansion and maybe multiple houses, and he's flying first class, or maybe even he flies private once in a while, and he is in a sense for wealthy. Now, he has his son, the grandson now. He's the third generation, and this is a kid who's born into wealth. He's born in a mansion. He probably heard what his immigrant grandfather did, came to his country working on houses and stuff, but never really experienced it because he just sees his dad now, who turned the $1 million business into a $50 million business, riding around in expensive cars, flying private. And the grandson is more like, hey, I'm going to inherit this giant $50 million a year business. You know, this is the grandson is kind of like the rich kid of Instagram. He's probably spending more time, you know, flying around in his dad's jet and taking selfies in front of a Ferrari and flying around to exotic countries. And that grandson probably does get into a really good school, but it's because the dad paid $1 million, you know, donation. And the third generation kid, even if he's into really doing his job and helping to grow the business, he doesn't have that. He never really swung a hammer. He didn't have that sort of that critical education you need. And that third generation kid, even if he has good intentions, he's going that wealth is going to be able to decline because he doesn't have the knowledge to take that wealth to the next level. So how does this apply to you? Well, it applies to you is that if you learn something that makes you money, don't become complacent. Don't become like the third generation grandson who's just raised in private jets and in mansions and stuff and doesn't learn the lessons from the granddad who, you know, came to the country swinging a hammer and flipping houses. Build your own wealth, learn how you built it, and don't become complacent and don't become like the rich grandson who will end up squandering the family wealth. So I hope this video was helpful and insightful, and I do recommend that you look up the history of wealthy families and see the sort of the trajectory of the Rockefellers, the Vanderbilts, and the Carnegies and the DuPonts. It's very interesting, especially with the Rockefeller family. It's very interesting how that family has a lot, even though David Rockefeller is still rich, how some of the family wealth has decayed over the past couple of decades. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Thanks. Bye.